Welcome back into the 14. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Joining me today, Barry Allen, who's our main baseball guy at the 14. Barry's going to be joining us for baseball coverage on the podcast and on the site all year. Barry, welcome back in. Hope you're doing well. We think we're going to have baseball, but my goodness, the weather in the Southeast is not cooperating.
Not a bit. I think the old one of the old Christmas carols we know, the weather outside is frightful. But I think we're kind of delightful that college baseball season is, at least on the D1 level, is around the corner. And I do see light at the end of the tunnel. Some of these teams will be, taking the field tomorrow for the first time. We've had a lot of cancellations, and some of them are good cancellations because it's normal. You do see games canceled for rain and snow and ice, and only just a handful of series that I've been able to look at, are COVID related. One involving Oregon in the Pac-12, but a lot of these teams are canceling because of weather, and so that means we're getting back to normal as well. So that's a good thing.
Well, and we already had a cancellation for, I think, was it Kentucky and Clemson?
Kentucky at North Carolina this weekend. Now that is a COVID SEC team, and that is COVID related. So that series will not be played. So Kentucky will be the only SEC team not taking the field this weekend. North Carolina obviously looking at other options to try to play, but the only COVID-related cancellation as far as the SEC is concerned this weekend is, in fact, Kentucky.
Well, let's hope it stays that way. I texted a certain SEC coach this morning. I said, how's your schedule looking this weekend? And his response was one word, and it was white. So that sort of sums up how things have been in this part of the country. Maybe not yours. You're doing this from Tuscaloosa, and I'm in Nashville. But I'm looking out the window, and there's about 6 inches of snow and ice on the ground, and that has dampened the possibility, I guess, that we'll see baseball this weekend. But you could see some games moved to Saturdays. I know Texas A&M has already moved its scheduled Friday game, made it a Saturday doubleheader. I think you're going to see a lot of that. Now, some of that's going to depend on what opposing teams can do and what their leagues allow them to do, and can they stay over for a Monday or something like that. But lots of variables before we get started this weekend.
Yeah, you mentioned A&M. They've moved their series back. The big tournament this weekend in Arlington, Texas, at the Globe Life Park where the Rangers play, which they'll actually play their first season there this year, even though the ballpark opened last year in the World Series and some playoffs were held there. It's a big tournament this weekend, and involving three of our teams, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, and Arkansas, and that was pushed back from Friday, Saturday, Sunday to Saturday, Sunday, Monday, with Arkansas playing the Monday night game now at 8:00. Still issues in Texas. I know basketball games have been postponed and canceled. I know the Alabama-Texas A&M basketball game that sure you and Blake's touched on, not going to be played, as scheduled this week because of the weather. Alabama couldn't get there. Teams, can they get to Texas? Can they get out of Texas? Oklahoma's had some games where they were going to try to play Wichita State and Wichita State couldn't get in and out of a place. So now Oklahoma, I think, is going to play, Texas A&M Corpus Christi, who lost games because of weather. I know LSU's having a round robin in Baton Rouge this weekend, and that's been moved to Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Southeastern Louisiana, one of the teams in it, just 30 miles away. So LSU's going to play them on Monday night. So that really won't affect classes for either one of them or them staying over. But they've also got Air Force and Notre Dame coming in, which is kind of cool because that's two teams that Paul Mainieri's coached, in his career, Air Force, Notre Dame, and LSU. That's kind of the path he's taken to, getting to Baton Rouge. But the weather will play a factor this weekend on a lot of teams in a lot of places.
Well, one team that will not be getting snowed out, the Florida Gators, who start the year as the consensus number one in every single poll or ranking. Florida takes on 21st ranked Miami, which it has dominated lately. But the Canes, opinions across the board on that team. I've seen some, I think, that may even have them in the top 10. Some that barely have them ranked. D1 baseball was kind of the low man on that one. But Canes and Gators in a brand new stadium in Florida. That's going to be the one I think most eyes are going to be on. If you had to pick one series, I think that's easily the one we want to see this weekend.
Yeah, no doubt. Florida, Miami, anytime, any sport. I mean, that's a big deal. And to open the season in a brand new $61 million ballpark in Gainesville, long overdue. But that's the marquee series of the weekend. That you look at the rankings, you look at the preseason All-American teams, and it's hard to run down the list without stumbling across a Florida Gator or a Miami Hurricane. And should be a tremendous series. A lot of excitement in Gainesville about this ball club because they're so good, they're so talented. A lot of excitement about opening a new stadium, and a lot of excitement if you're a Gator because Kevin Sullivan just owns Miami and Florida State. I mean, he does. It's not close. I mean, it's 15-3 Florida in the last 18 meetings with Miami, and they keep matching Florida with Miami and Florida with Florida State in regionals and super regionals, and Florida just keeps brushing them aside and advancing. I think one year they had to beat Miami in a regional, and next year they had to beat Florida State in a super regional, and then I think they've played Florida State and Omaha several times and Miami several times, and Sully just keeps pushing them aside. It's really incredible how good Florida is against those two teams that the Florida fans expect to beat. I mean, football, their rival is Georgia and Florida State and Miami when they've all played, and they've handled those teams in baseball under Kevin O'Sullivan with pretty good success over the years. But being 15-3 against Miami in any sport is incredible, and what Florida's done in that series over the last few years has just been phenomenal.
Well, you look at where the Gators left off last year, and the 16-1 record is gaudy, but boy, you dig in and look at who those came against. I mean, Florida, opens last season beating USF, which is usually, sometimes a decent program. Most of those Florida programs are pretty good. Jacksonville, a midweek sweep, a sweep of Miami on the weekend, a weekend sweep of Troy, which is, decent a lot of years too. USF again, losing to Florida State to end the season. But it wasn't just the wins. It was the runs. Florida outscores opponents 123-46 on the year. And this was a team, the draft in the unusual season really hurt some teams. Like, for example, Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt lost some players to the draft last year, and a couple of other senior starters moved on. So now that's a team that is going to be with a lot of faces that fans outside of Vanderbilt don't know. Florida, it's just the opposite, right? Because the draft last year, because it only went 5 rounds, a lot of guys that could have gotten drafted are back. And look, the whole rotation returns for the Gators. Hunter Barco, Tommy Mace, Jack Leftwich. Judd Fabian in outfield, maybe the best offensive hitter or best position player in college baseball, certainly going to be on the shorts list. Josh Rivera, preseason All-SEC guy. Jacob Young, who led them in hitting a year ago, he's back. So this was a team that was playing at a high level, and almost all the key faces are back for them. I guess the exception would be Austin Langworthy. But other than that, you've got to like Florida between where it left off a year ago and all the returning talent. And I don't think anybody's really got a bone to pick with the Gators being preseason number 1.
No, I don't think so. And they seem to be the consensus pick for everybody. It's almost like Florida and everyone else in the preseason when you look at them. But they've got a really good lineup coming back. You mentioned Fabian, who's on every preseason All-American team, and Jacob Young, and Kirby McMullen has had success, and Cal Greenfield, is projected to be their starting catcher. Chris Armstrong is in the mix this year. They're talking about a really deep offensive lineup for Florida. I'm seeing things from, out of Florida where, Chris Armstrong has just been peppering the scoreboard 400 feet away from home plate. And, Fabian has, developed into a really good hitter and a really good player. Had 6 homers in 17 games last year for them. So it's really easy to see how the Gators can, will be able to score some runs and also be able to pitch, as they've always been able to pitch. But, now an offense to go along with that can, it can score a lot of runs and put a lot of pressure on the other team's defense and pitching staff, but also to, then they go out and, can pitch themselves and have a well-rounded team. And they're going to be excited to get in their new ballpark. And the game tomorrow is going to be on the SEC network. It's going to be live opening day baseball from Gainesville on the SEC network tomorrow. So 3 Eastern, its fans will have a chance to take a look at the Gators in the new park in Miami and see what this Florida lineup is all about.
Yeah, and name to watch on Miami, Adrian Del Castillo, their catcher. I don't know if he'll be a catcher in the big leagues, but he is potentially the top hitter if you just isolate the hitting tool in the draft. So that'll be an interesting matchup to watch how the Gators handle him. Barry, there are 2 teams other than Florida that are consensus Omaha picks. And by that I mean you look at the polls in the top 8, and these other teams would be in all the top 8 of all those polls. Vanderbilt 1, Ole Miss the other. Vanderbilt as high as 3 in some of the polls. The coaches had Vanderbilt the highest. BA and Perfect Game had the Commodores at 6, but nobody had them lower. Ole Miss also consensus 4, 5, and 6 by every poll. Let's start with the Commodores. Florida may be the best team, but I'm not sure Vanderbilt doesn't have the best pitching staff. You start with Kumar Rocker, who everybody knows, the favorite to be the number 1 pick in the draft at this point. Jack Leiter actually, and SEC fans may not know that name as much yet because we didn't get to conference play last year, but Jack Leiter is a draft-eligible sophomore. If you recognize the last name, of course, his dad was Al Leiter, who had a long, successful major league career, and his uncle Mark also did the same. So Jack Leiter, actually, someone in one of the mock drafts released this week, someone had Jack Leiter going number 1 overall. So the Commodores, with 2 weekend arms, they're in the mix of that number 1 overall pick. And I think the thing that people don't know because they didn't see it last year, depth. That pitching staff is as deep with great arms as Tim Corbin has had. I think they can go 12, 13, maybe 14 deep with arms you can see on the weekend that can pitch well and not just in a mop-up role. The question with Vanderbilt, well, there are a few actually, Barry. The lineup are not names you recognize unless you follow Vanderbilt. That 19 squad and that Ferocum lineup, they're all gone. Cooper Davis, the closest thing to what they've got back. He was a starter on that team till he lost his job. He got hurt and was out hit. But I think the concern for Vanderbilt is the lineup. There is some talent there, but these kids haven't proven it at an SEC level. And then you look around the landscape, and you have teams like Florida that we mentioned. They do have players who have started multiple years in the SEC. That's not the case with Vandy, but I think the arms are going to have Vanderbilt in the discussion. And again, the expectation as they get to Omaha, and they do, boy, that may be the team you don't want to face, because between the arms and the fact that they may have the fastest outfield in college baseball, they could be very dangerous if they can get back.
Well, they will be, and it starts, obviously, as you mentioned, Rocker and Leiter, 1-2 in their rotation, and you're going to find you'll be hard pressed to find 2 better 1s and 2s, and maybe hard pressed to find a better 1 and a better number 2 overall in the league. And the joke always on Vanderbilt, around the SEC, you hear teams and you hear coaches and things, how good is Vanderbilt? They go, well, their Tuesday guy throws 98. We don't even have a Tuesday guy. Their Tuesday guy, he's throwing 98. He's not even good enough to pitch on Sunday. Well, he is, but he's just not at Vanderbilt. He'd be somebody else's Friday night guy. And your Sunday guy would be somebody else's Friday night guy. That's what I always say about, Vanderbilt's Tuesday night starters are better than most other teams, SEC weekend guys. And they've proven that over the years with, the guys they have with Fulmer and Bueller and, Price and Jensen Lewis and, this names just go on and on and on and on. It's pitched in the big leagues and Mike Minor, and they've proven that over the years. But they're deep on the mound. They're really good. Very, very good. I know they got to replace. I think they replaced Hickman and Brown, a couple of World Series guys from years back. But I think they're very talented on the mound. I think they're very deep on the mound, and I think because they're so good on the mound, they'll be able to give the offense a little bit of time. They kind of have to think back. I didn't really get a lot of SEC baseball. We got no SEC baseball last year, but we didn't get a lot of college baseball at all. But Vandy kind of struggled early in the year last year, and they, coming off that World Series, and they kind of got off to a little slow start, and people were wondering, well, what are they going to be like when they get into the, when they get into the SEC? And I think once they got into it, they would be fine. It just needed some time to, try to figure things out on offense. But they'll be able to do that maybe a little bit easier this year just because of the depth they have on their mound.
Well, and speaking of that, Ole Miss has got a couple of premier starters in their weekend rotation. The lineup got a lot more experience than Vanderbilt has, but the Rebels just kind of right on Vanderbilt's heels in terms of the national polls. That's a team that I know a lot has been made of their postseason hiccups and not getting to Omaha. Mike Bianco only been there once, and that's been a sore spot down in Oxford. But this looks to me like a team that I think the Omaha expectations for Ole Miss are fair.
I think so, and I think, it's not fair to put this label on them, on their team, but I think if they don't go to Omaha this year, their fan base is going to be really, really disappointed. And that's not to say they will or they won't, but this is a talented team. They've lost some players and they've lost some really good players, but this is a talented group, and Gunnar Hoglund and Doug Nikhazy, on the mound. We've talked about 3 teams and we've mentioned 8 or 9 pitchers, so far. It's a pitching, it's a pitching kind of deal where these, all these teams just have these arms and just keep running them out there each and every week. And there's just a lot of really good, players and really good pitchers. And I think I think they're looking for, big things in Oxford, and probably rightfully so. They had a tremendous season, starting last year. They had a really good run at 6. I think they were 16-1 to start. The Gators were 16-1. I think Ole Miss was leading the nation in home runs when the season ended last year. They've always been able to hit. They've always had power. They've always been able to run and steal bags, and they've always had really good athletic players. And they've had good pitching as well. And I I don't see that changing anytime this year for for them at all. I think they have a legitimate chance to win the West, win the SEC, and go to Omaha.
There were 3 teams that we haven't talked about yet that got top 8 mentions in some polls. The next 2 in order, I've sort of done a composite ranking. It's a little bit of an inexact science, but tried to come up with a consensus ranking and how the polls rank these teams. Mississippi State, number 7 nationally in that. The Bulldogs ranked anywhere from 7 to 12 in the top 10 of every poll except for Perfect Game, which was an outlier on a few of these teams. Look, this is not the Mississippi State team that we left off with in 2020, where it had that just epic infield of Foscue and Westberg that have been around forever. But you do have some other guys. Tanner Allen is back. And really, State's issue the last couple years was the bats were there and the arms weren't maybe up to Mississippi State standards. This year, it's going to be a little different. State like Vanderbilt is going to be breaking in some new bats, but you have weekend guys like Christian McLeod, Eric Sarantola, who are really potential top 5 round guys, where maybe other than McLeod, who was really good last year, 21 innings, 35 strikeouts, 6 walks. Sarantola more maybe projection and results so far, but he was good last year. But all of a sudden, I think you've got some arms back at State, and they may carry the day a little more than the bats, given what State lost from the last couple of years.
Well, I have read a couple of different articles, about Mississippi State, and in one of those that caught my eye was Chris Lemonis, their head coach, talking about how their weekend rotation may be among the best ever. And I'm assuming he's talking about Mississippi State and the SEC. Just really good arms on the mound. A lot of power arms, and just a really really good deep pitching staff. And and I think they're real excited about that. You mentioned Sarantola and McLeod, and they also Will Bednar is a freshman right-hander, and all three are just straight up power guys. I mean, Sarantola is a huge guy, 6'5" Canadian, and just it's been really good for them. McLeod had a tremendous year last year before the pandemic hit. Uh, Bednar had a couple of relief appearances last year, 23 strikeouts and 6 walks in 15 innings. Had a 1.76 ERA, fastball, curveball kind of guy. So it's those three guys will lead them. And one thing that I feel like, not because we have the same namesake, but I think Tanner Allen kind of goes unnoticed, kind of unrecognized a little bit in the SEC. I think he's a really good hitter. I think he's a power hitter. I know he's had guys in front of him. You mentioned Foscue and Westberg, and I think Mangum a few years back, and Elijah McNamara was there, hitting around him and stuff, and he had some guys, in the lineup that people knew about and concentrated on, and so now maybe he's that guy this year, and we'll see how he does. But I've always thought he was a really good hitter. I thought he could play, he can play multiple positions for them, and I've always thought he's one of the really top hitters in this league, and I think he'll have a chance to prove that this year, in their lineup. Just a really good arm. They just have a lot of really good players, in their lineup and up and down the order. They've always been able to hit as well, and being able to go with what they have, on the mound this year, they're going to be very dangerous.
One spot behind State in the composite poll that I have put together based on those 6 rankings is LSU. So if this is right, that means 8 of the teams in Omaha, 5 will be from the SEC, which is just phenomenal. But anyway, that's how tough the league's going to be. And oh, by the way, we're not nearly done talking about the depth, as you will see as we go down. But the Tigers, another team where the pitching has lagged in recent years. I don't think that's going to be the case this year. Jaden Hill, the headliner there, and Jaden Hill, a kid that some think is the most talented pitcher in the league. And that discussion includes Rocker and Leiter. Now, he's been hurt. The performance hasn't been there. This year, he'll be in the rotation and not in the pen. So we will get to see how that goes. Landon Marceau in that 2-hole was very good last year. A.J. Labas, the number 3 no-hit Oklahoma for 8 innings last year. Devin Fontenot may be the best reliever in the league. On the offensive side, you've got Giovanni Giacomo, You got Cade Beloso. Some names that we know from that team that we've seen before. This is a team that, again, according to the prognosticators, got a good shot to get back to Omaha. And my goodness, Omaha certainly changes when the Tigers are there.
Yeah, it's a different animal when LSU rolls into Rosenblatt and now TD Ameritrade. I mean, it's a really different atmosphere. The people of Omaha know LSU. They recognize LSU. They've been there so many times. They've won it 6 times. I mean, it's just an incredible, tradition that they have, to get to Omaha. Paul Mainieri took Notre Dame there. He's taken LSU there. He won it with LSU. He's very comfortable being there. His longtime friend, Jim Hendry, who was a big time scouting director and GM with Cubs and the Yankees, was the head coach at Creighton, and took Creighton there in the 90s and had that epic 2 games with Wichita State in Omaha that year with the Bennis. He had the Bennis brothers, taking on Wichita State in Omaha. I think it was 91. Really good. So he knows. Paul Mainieri knows about Omaha and has a lot of tradition there with not only himself but with his friends. Of course, his dad was a outstanding junior college coach at Miami-Dade, and how many summers did they spend in Grand Junction, Colorado, in the Junior College World Series? So they know about the World Series, and I think their staff begins with Jaden Hill, who I think we touched on this last time we talked. He's a consensus first team preseason All-American. He didn't even make the All-SEC team. And I know that's a quirk because, they only picked 2 starters and 1 reliever on the coach's preseason team. But that's a guy that didn't even make preseason All SEC. That's probably going to make a lot of money, this year when the season is over with the draft. And then you mentioned, the other, Marceau and AJ Labas, both of those guys, veteran guys and been around. I think Labas is coming off. Was he coming off last year, Tommy John surgery, I believe, and he's back again. And it appears that all of those had a really strong fall. So Alan Dunn, the pitching coach, played at Alabama, coached at Vanderbilt. Now the pitching coach at LSU, has got a really, really deep staff to deal with. They've always been able to pitch, and they were, certainly can hit, with anybody. And there are some names you mentioned, Beloso being back, and there are there's some familiar names in their lineup, and they feel like that this could be a good year for LSU. It's because of the just the depth of the league. How will they finish? Where will they be when the season gets to the ending point? But I think they expect another deep run by the Tigers in Baton Rouge this year as far as baseball is concerned.
A half step down from that group is Arkansas, the Razorbacks 12th in this consensus ranking I've put together. Interestingly enough, that the ratings people and the pollsters really have a pretty wide variety of opinion on these guys. D1, the coaches, and the baseball writers have the Hogs at 8. Perfect Game has got Arkansas at 20. Collegiate Baseball has them at 22. And BA right in the middle at 14. We talked about lack of familiarity with some teams. Now, Arkansas, you look at that lineup, and these are names Casey Opitz at catcher, who could be the best one in the league. Robert Moore, who has been a first-team preseason All-American by some. Christian Franklin, who is an All-American, potential first-round pick. Matt Goodhart, their DH, once again. He held that role 2 years ago when they went to Omaha. I think the issue for them is the rotation. They have Lyle Lockhart as a 3, who was the Friday night starter for Houston for 2 years. Zebulon Vermillion, though, is their 1. He was their closer last year. The rotation is kind of the thing that is uncertain for them, but you have some names in the bullpen we know. Kevin Kopps, Connor Noland, Cole Ramage being a few, Patrick Wicklander. So I don't know how this settles out. Arkansas has got a lot of arms. Whether they're the elite arms that you need to compete in this league, I don't know, but that's an interesting team too.
They really are, and you don't know if their number 1 starter will be one of the top pitchers in the league. But I mean, is there a better name in the SEC? Is there a better name in college football and college baseball than Zebulon Vermillion? I mean, what a classic name. Run that guy out as your number 1, on the weekend. And he's pitched for them. He's pitched in some limited roles and was a closer last year. 1-0 record, no earned runs, 12 strikeouts and no walks in 7 innings. Peyton Pallette is a freshman, had a little experience last year, 5 innings. He's from Benton, Arkansas. He's projected as the number 2. And then you mentioned Lockhart, the Houston transfer, 19 strikeouts and 17 innings last year from, in Houston, moving into Arkansas now. You've mentioned guys, Kopps has been there for a long time. He's a redshirt junior. Connor Noland, who's a former number 1, been in their SEC rotation, played quarterback for Arkansas. He's available. He was 2-0 last year with a 2.00 earned run average as a sophomore. Cole Ramage, a junior. Caleb Bolden is a sophomore. He has innings in the SEC. Patrick Wicklander has innings in the SEC, been an SEC starter. So they have a lot of depth. They have guys that can pitch and can eat up some innings for them. They just don't have a ton of experience, SEC wise and starting. But I think their offense, will help them, maybe get through that. Arkansas has always been a really good hitting team. They have Brady Stevens, who was the 2020 JUCO Player of the Year, who began his career at Wichita State. A phenomenal start last year, 507 or junior college, 507, 543, 1240 slash line, 14 homers, 47 RBI in 75 at bats. Pretty decent at math, but that home run to at bat ratio is pretty phenomenal there. About 1 in every 5, it sounds like, or on that deal that he comes up to the plate. JUCO Player of the Year, really, really good player. Opitz is a really good catcher, preseason all conference, thrown out almost half of the base stealers in his career, 35 out of 75, 3-year starter for them. Nesbitt's been around for them and helped them some. Jalen Battles has played. Christian Franklin, second team All-American, preseason All-SEC, pretty nice slash line last year in limited duty, 381, 467, 619. Matt Goodhart's a DH, can play some different positions, and so they have a good lineup. Will the pitchers be able to catch up, and get them there? I like their team. I like Dave Van Horn. I think he's a really good coach. I think they've done a lot of really good things there, and they'll open at home with Alabama, to open SEC play. But certainly Arkansas I think it's a team to keep your eye on. Just particularly with those guys we mentioned, in the offensive lineup.
Well, you talk about impressive home run ratios. This one doesn't beat it, but maybe more impressive given who they were playing. Wes Clark last year at South Carolina hit 8 home runs in 56 at-bats over 16 games. He's a preseason All-American for the Gamecocks. That's a program that's fallen in recent years, and especially on the pitching side, but I have some names there, and Brett Carey, who's been their closer, and a good one. They got Brandon Jordan, who's a JUCO kid, who played pretty well last year. Thomas Farr, another JUCO guy, who's their Friday night guy. The Gamecocks, this is that next step down from where we're talking. These teams all in the 20s or so in most preseason rankings. Carolina, everybody across the board, pretty consistent on those guys, except for Perfect Game, which did not rank the Gamecocks. The other 5 had them between 18 and 23. But that's a place where 10 years ago the Gamecocks were the top program in college baseball and have really dropped off since then. But it sounds like this is the team that maybe takes a step, not to get them back to Omaha, at least not where they're rated, but maybe a little bit better than they've been the last few years.
Yeah, you're talking about a team that, won back-to-back national titles, 2010 and 11. It went from never losing a NCAA tournament game at home to losing a regional at home, to then having to go on the road and play in a regional, to not even making a regional in recent years. Chad Holbrook took over for Ray Tanner, who retired and became the AD, and things did not work out for Chad. He's now at the College of Charleston. It still is a really good coach. It just their expectations there are so good. And now, Mark Kingston there's the new coach, and got just had some struggles. Last year, obviously with COVID, as everybody else did, but got off to a pretty good start. If I'm not mistaken, and I meant to look this up before we got to talking today, but if I'm not mistaken, I believe that South Carolina is the only team to make the SEC baseball tournament every year since 1992, when they joined the league.
Wow!
And I know they got even 2 years ago when they were not good. They were 28 and 28, and they were 8 and 22 in the league. They finished ahead of Alabama and Kentucky, and got in. And I think they played a game it was Mississippi State, or they gave somebody a really hard game the first game they played, and I think it ended up being LSU and Mississippi State played that epic 17-inning game. But they've been consistent through the years, and been able to to get have success and get into postseason. And when they get in there, particularly if they're at home, they can really make a deep run. But that's not been the case the last couple of years for them. But they seem to be on the upswing. Last year, 12-4. I think 2018, they lost to Arkansas in the Super Regional. They won a regional and lost to Arkansas in the Super Regional, one of those dynamic Arkansas teams that ended up losing, to Oregon State in just heartbreak fashion in Omaha. They were out away from winning the College World Series. But South Carolina is an interesting team. Where will they? What will they do this year? What will their lineup look like? What will they look like on the mound? And can they regain their status in the East, which is going to be difficult with Florida and Vanderbilt ahead of them. But certainly a program that 10 years ago, as you mentioned, was as dominant as any team in this league and as dominant as any team in the country.
Well, coming from the other end of the spectrum is Tennessee, which really fell on hard times for maybe a dozen years. The Vols, early part of the 2000s, that was a team that was in Omaha about every other year and produced some great players, and then it just fell apart for a couple of years under a couple different coaches. Arkansas assistant Tony Vitello has taken over there now. Tennessee really hit the snot out of the ball a year ago, but lost some of its bigger guns. But you still look across that lineup. Connor Pavloni at catcher, Max Ferguson, All-American second baseman, Jake Rucker, the shortstop, who played on that Little League team that got such fame for Tennessee a few years back. You've got some freshmen in Jordan Beck who they like. You've got Evan Russell still around, Pete Durkay still around, Christian Scott. Then you go to the rotation, and I don't know that it's going to be in the upper half of the league in terms of talent, but you got Jackson Leith and Camden Sewell back, Redmond Walsh, their closer, who's been so good. Then you got Sean Hunley, Will Heflin, who've been around forever, particularly Heflin. This is a program where Vitello is really, I don't know if you'd say overachieved, but certainly his first year or two probably did. And certainly I don't think anybody would say the Vols left much meat on the bone the last couple of years, but you've got to like where he's got this program headed. And again, this is going to be a team that may get lost in discussion of some of these elite teams we've talked about. But, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to see Tennessee in the upper half of that East race and maybe even giving a Vandy or a Carolina a little more run for their money than people perceive.
Well, I think you're absolutely right on that. I think Tennessee's, they've had a proud tradition over the years. They went to Omaha a number of times with, Helton and then Chris Burke and Wyatt Allen took them back. They just had a lot of really good teams and a lot of really good players, over the years when, under Rod Delmonico and assistant coach Larry Simcox, kind of falling on hard times when they let Delmonico go, didn't exactly light the woods on fire, over the next couple of times. Although I thought Dave Serrano was a really good hire, it just didn't work out for him at Tennessee. And, now he's back at Cal State Northridge. But, Tennessee started 13-0 last year. They finished 15-2. I think they kind of struggled a little bit against Wright State in that last series before the SEC, got started. They had a huge tournament win in the Round Rock Classic with a win over number 1 Texas Tech and number 25 Stanford. Two big marquee wins for them. I mean, they're 55-23. The last 2 years under Tony Vitello, and I think they're looking for big things this year. Jackson Leith, is a JUCO product, led the team with 29 strikeouts last year, which was 6th in the conference. He was 4-0 with a 1.45, ERA. So they've always had a big guy on the mound that could get things done, in the Friday night role for them. Crochet the last couple of years, although they didn't get much out of him last year, injury, and then he was drafted. But certainly, had a really good, have had some really, really good pitchers and inning eaters over the year. And you talk about the SEC last year. I mean, Tennessee led the league in slugging, on base percentage, scored the most runs, had the most RBI, and was second to Ole Miss in home runs. They hit 31. You mentioned Rucker and Pavloni, and then Luke Lipsius, had put a lot of meat in their lineup, and Pavloni at catcher, in that one of the good backstop, but also a backstop that can hit. So you're always looking for a catcher that can swing it. And Tennessee, one of those teams that I've seen, projected to go to the NCAA tournament, and I do think that they will give South Carolina and Vanderbilt. They're still far behind Vanderbilt, but I certainly think they could, maybe make a push this year and push South Carolina and Vanderbilt, in the East and be in the upper, 6, 7 in this league and be one of the teams that, maybe goes to Hoover and has a decent week. And Hoover could be a team that could bring an NCAA tournament to Knoxville. It's not had a lot of NCAA tournament success and not a lot of NCAA tournament experience in Tennessee and Knoxville over the last few years. But, certainly a team it looks like under Tony Vitello is on the rise.
Georgia is going to be an interesting one. The Bulldogs just behind those other teams. Most teams had them, or most pollsters had them in their top 25s. And most expect Georgia to go to a regional, but the Bulldogs, I have some concerns. I hear that they're going to be starting the opening weekend without Jonathan Cannon and Ryan Webb, who are their number 1 and 2 starters. I don't know how serious those injuries are. C.J. Smith, their 3, is a pretty good number 3. We've seen some good things out of him at times. They've got Nolan Crisp to close. He was at Florida just a couple of years ago, and they've got some arms who pitched. The lineup, I think, is the question. The Georgia has pitched and defended really well. That's been a constant for them the last 2, 3, 4 years. But I think there's a lot of questions in the lineup. Usually when Georgia has issues, it's on the hitting side. And there's some names of guys who are returning that we know. Riley King, one of them, seems like he's been there forever. Garrett Blaylock is a senior who'll start at shortstop. Mason Meadows, their catcher, a senior. But I think the questions about the Bulldogs are around the bats. And now that you've got a couple of starters in the rotation who I think are going to miss the first weekend, that's something to monitor.
It is, and I think Georgia, a couple of years, last year obviously didn't make the SEC season like everybody else, but I think when you look back at, the season before that, losing, at home, to Florida State in the regionals, they're still kind of thinking about that maybe a little bit, in Athens. Went 46-17 in 19, was 14-4 last year. And Scott Strickland's done a decent job there. I said 19, it was 18. They lost to Florida State at home. They finished, well, no, it was 19. They finished second to the Noles in the 19 regional. Mike Martin's last hurrah that ended up getting him to Omaha. But they do have, their offense. That's kind of always been something that's kind of been their Achilles heel. And you mentioned Meadows, only hit 150 last year behind the plate, but is a good backstop. Probably need a little bit more for him. Their projected third baseman is Garrett Blaylock. He hit 180 last year. Cole Tate in left field hit 339 at shortstop last year. Riley King, a left fielder, hit 203 last year. Connor Tate, the right fielder, hit 243 a year ago. So not a lot of staggering numbers. Ben Anderson, sophomore center fielder, had a 414, 544, 552 slash line. And, some people say he kind of reminds them of Brett Butler, played for the Braves in the, in the major leagues. But the offense has been a struggle for Georgia, over the years. And we'll certainly see what happens, pitching wise. C.J. Smith has had some, has some flashy moments, but had some back problems a year ago. He's healthy. And Nolan Crisp, who transferred from Florida, had 7 saves with the Gators in 19, didn't pitch last year. Logan Moody, is a former infielder, now a middle reliever. So they've got some guys on the mound. One guy I think they'll miss is Aaron Shunk, who was a good two-way guy. Could play third base, could hit, come in and close at the end of the game. They don't have him. They don't have him again either. Somebody that I think they will miss. In his deal, and obviously Hancock, being gone, as legit as he was, and Wilcox, both of those guys on the mound, certainly miss them, and they're be maybe trying to find their way the first couple of weekends of the season, especially with the injuries that they have.
Another coach has done a really good job of bringing life back to a program that had lacked one for a while is Butch Thompson at Auburn. I think the last 2 or 3 years, what he's done has been as good as anybody. That World Series team a couple of years ago, that team just had all kinds of issues with guys in the lineup that underperformed, but it really came together for them, and really Auburn had a chance to do more in Omaha than it did, if not for a kind of a defensive meltdown out there. But you look at the names returning for the Tigers. I mean, that infield is going to be about as good as anybody's. On the left side, you got Bliss and Woolley, who are all conference players. You look throughout the lineup, Judd Ward, Stephen Williams, seniors, names we know, guys who have produced in this league. You look down to the staff, Cody Greenhill has moved out of the pen into the rotation where he's their one. Richard Fitz to number 2, a guy that a lot of people have projected as a mid-first rounder. Their bullpen has a few freshmen in there, but also some names like Brooks Fuller and Jack Owen, who we know. That's a team that really hasn't gotten a lot of talk because of all the other teams we've talked about, and certainly nobody putting the Tigers in that upper echelon of teams. In fact, Auburn not even ranked by a couple of the polls. But you look at the Tigers in terms of where they left off 2 years ago, in terms of some of these names of these kids that have been to Omaha before. I'm not sure about the pitching because Greenhill is going to have to hold up under a bigger workload. You know, Fitz has not proven it over a full season, but this is one of these teams with the way Butch Thompson has done things, as good a job as he's done. I wonder if that's a team we're sleeping on just a little bit.
Well, they started last year 8-0 after going to Omaha the year prior to that, and then were swept at home by UCF, and then they came back and won 8 in a row to go 13-3, and then suffered midweek losses to Georgia Tech and Wofford before getting ready to play Texas A&M. So you look at that and go, well, they were hot, they were cold, they were hot, they were cold. What would they do when they got into the SEC? And I think maybe some people are trying to wait and see what would this team do in the SEC. And they do have, you know, several guys to build their offense around. You mentioned Bliss, you know, steady defense to the middle infield, you know, a lot of power, you know, rarely strikes out. Rankin Woolley, high average middle of the order guy with power. You know, they hit 4 homers and had 39 RBI between them last year in the limited duty that they have. You know, Judd Ward, you know, really good outfielder. His dad is a high school coach in Alabama. His brother played college baseball too. So he's good arm, good range in the outfield, good leadoff hitter. I think he hit for the limited games we played last year. I think he had a game where he hit for the cycle last year for Auburn. You know, Case and Howell, you know, they were looking for big things out of him. He was injured last year and missed 7 of their 18, 19 games. And then, of course, Stephen Williams, you know, everybody knows he's a middle of the lineup guy, you know, kind of a slow start last year, but, you know, brings plenty of power to their lineup. So they've got guys in the middle of the lineup and the top of the order, you know, that can create some offense. And, you know, I'm interested to see how Richard Fitz will do, you know, with pressure on him as a SEC guy. You know, he was a key starter and reliever during their 19 run to the World Series. Can Greenhill convert from closer to starter? And of course, Jack Owen, he's been a dependable guy, battled some injuries throughout his career, but he's been a dependable guy, lefty, you know, on the mound as a starter and in the bullpen. So we'll just kind of see how the season unfolds, you know, for this Auburn team who, you know, in 19, you know, they were the ones, you know, that were still playing, you know, when Rod Bramlett and his wife were tragically killed in a car accident in Auburn. It happened just right after their play in the SEC tournament. And, you know, here they have to go 4 days later without their radio announcer, you know, to Atlanta to play in the regional, and they win. And then they go to Chapel Hill to North Carolina and they win a super, and they go to the World Series in Omaha and play. And like you mentioned, well, they had a 3 or 4 error game and a 2 or 3 error inning, you know, against Mississippi State on a Sunday night, that if that, you know, a couple of balls bounce differently there, you know, they may be making a deeper run in Omaha than we think. And so it'd be they're an interesting team to watch, particularly with the veterans they have in place in the lineup and on the mound. They'll certainly be a team to watch.
Well, I've said for a while, I think Alabama's sort of my sleeper team, but then you look through the rest of the league and go, okay, who do you slot them in front of? But my goodness, I think Alabama, I'm just going to go ahead and crown them the best preseason last place team in the history of baseball. Alabama goes 16-1 last year, has a potential top 5 overall pick back in Connor Prelip to anchor that rotation. Got its closer, Chase Lee. Got a lot of good hitters back. Sam Prater, their catcher. Now, they lose Tyler Gentry and Brett Auerbach, who were their top 2 hitters from a year ago. But, boy, lots of names of kids who've been there 3, 4, 5 years. And Alabama really felt like it was putting it together last year just before the season got canceled at the dawn of SEC play.
Well, they were 16-1 last year, maybe not against some of the better competition. But I do think that they felt like that they were going to be a force to be reckoned with in the SEC. Had Missouri coming to Tuscaloosa to open the season, and I think they were going to surprise, quite a few people, in this league last year. They've only won 20 SEC games in the last 3 years, so I think people are trying to decide where will Alabama be this year? What kind of team will they be? A team that hasn't been to a regional since 2014. So where will they, what will this team do? And I think he's got a lot of options. And I'm actually planning on going to see the first game tomorrow. He's got Peyton Wilson penciled in at second base, Drew Williamson at first base, Jim Jarvis at short, Zane Denton at third base, Sam Prater, who's I think a 4th-year sophomore, but hadn't had an SEC at bat since 2018. Injured early in 19. We didn't play any SEC games last year. So here's a guy that's your 4th-year sophomore starting catcher that when he plays against Arkansas in 4 weeks, it will be 3 years since he's had an at bat in an SEC game. And that's really hard to fathom, just the way things are, how the world is going right now. But TJ Reeves had a really good first season, did not have a real great start last year. They think he will be better this year. Owen Diodati, can swing the bat. William Hamiter, I think, is looking to take over in right field. Diodati looks like he's going to be their everyday DH. Connor Prelip, Antoine John, and Dylan Smith is going to be their rotation, SEC weekend rotation to start this week. Prelip, obviously one of the premier pitchers and left-handers in all of college baseball. 3-0 last year in 4 starts, had 35 punch-outs in 21 innings. Would like to see how he does over the course of the season. They really feel like he's going to run out there on Friday afternoon or Friday night, whatever time they play on Friday, and that Alabama's going to have a chance to win that game. And they've not been able to do that in the past. They've always been overmatched on Friday and Saturday on the mound by other guys. Now they feel like with Connor Prelip that their number one is, can go out and pitch with anybody else's number one. They got a really deep bullpen, 7 or 8 guys that they feel like they can use. They also feel like they have, 6 or 7 guys that could be the number 2 or the number 3 starter. So I think they're just going to kind of play out the first month of the season and just kind of see what happens before they really settle in on, their rotation. And then they've got 2 guys that are veterans, inning eaters, really good guys in the pen. Brock Guffey, a lefty, and Chase Lee, a righty, a 3/4 side armor guy. Both of those guys have come in high leverage situations before in SEC games and non-conference games and been very successful and very effective. So he likes his team. He thinks this is the best team he's had. He thinks this is the most athletic looking team that he's had at Alabama. And he said that, when we get off the bus, we look like an SEC baseball team where maybe in the past couple of years we didn't.
Okay, exhibit number 49 on how incredibly good we think the league is going to be this year. Texas A&M expected to be one of the bottom 3 teams in the league by most people. A&M has been in the NCAA tournament every year since 2007. which I think is probably one of the top 5 active streaks. Rob Childress has been there, I think, the whole time for that. Indeed, he has. This is a team that develops pitching consistently year in and year out. May not wow you on offense a lot of years, but the arms are always there. Of course, a lot of the arms that we know are gone, Asa Lacy, Christian Roa, and that's going to be the issue for them. You look at the lineup. Now, there's some names we know here. Mikey Honer, Bryce Blom, guys like that, although a lot of names that we don't know. But you look down to the pitching, it's just not what we've seen in the past, but still some talented guys there. Bryce Miller being their starter that we know. What do we think of the Aggies this year?
Well, they're always a very competitive team. It always seemed to be right in the mix. 15-3 a year ago. Just, they've always been able to hit. They've always, had really good offense. They've got to replace some guys. You mentioned pitching too, but they've got to replace some guys, offensively. Just always been consistent team. You talk about Asa Lacy. He was the highest drafted player they've ever had. Christian Roa pitched well, last year for them. They're both gone. So how will they replace them? I think one guy you look at in their lineup in the middle of their order is an Ole Miss transfer, Bryce Blom, who didn't have great numbers last year, hit only .215 with a homer and 17 RBI, but he led the team in walks and doubles and RBI in the limited time. Will Frizzell has, started 100 games for them. Mikey Honer, the catcher, has had, significant experience, and they've also had, Hunter Coleman, who's not projected to be a starter. He's a 5th-year senior, started on their 17 World Series team. He hit .269 with 3 homers and 52 at bats last year, and he's not even in their projected starting lineup, but certainly a guy that can catch, play first base, DH, come off the bench and hit a pinch hit home run. And they have a kid that's coming in from Grayson Community College in Jordan Thompson, an outfielder that had a 435, 532, 839 slash line at Grayson last year, and 5 homers, 21 RBI, and had hit .310 with 23 RBI as a true freshman at Incarnate Word in 2019. So had his 3rd school in 3 years, and they're kind of hoping that he's going to be able to come in and maybe give them a lift offensively as well. But the Aggies, a team that you don't hear a lot of people talking about, but when you get into the 10th, 11th, and 12th teams in the league, making the NCAA tournament, they always find their way in there, and they're projected to get in there this year. I've seen projections of 10 teams, 11 teams, and 12 teams, to make it. And the Aggies are certainly among those, trying to get in. And, I think Rob Childress is hoping to, build some depth on the mound and, create, good pitching, good hitting, a balanced lineup. I know COVID will hurt a little bit because of the limited seating as it does in a lot of stadiums, but that would be one place that, non-COVID is a really difficult place to go play, because Bluebell Park is one of the finest in the league, and their atmosphere is really, really good.
Well, speaking of newer parks, I guess Bluebell is not, but at least not the top of the list, and certainly Florida, the only new one in the league. But Kentucky Proud Park, a newer one, and that leads us to Kentucky. Again, another story of in any other league, where do these guys rank? Everybody's got Kentucky 6th or 7th in the East, but again, TJ Collette, 26 career home runs. He's an all-SEC type player. They've got John Rhodes, who's been listed on some preseason All-American teams in right field. Kentucky always has a Shelby. This time it's Sharon Shelby, who's a graduate student, I think, at this point. You look at the arms, that's been the issue. But you have some names here. Mason Hazelwood did better a year ago. They've got a new pitching coach. You have some names we've seen around for a while, like Jimmy Ramsey, who's back in the pen. But this one will be interesting, too, because I don't think we just should count the Wildcats out from the jump.
No, I agree. You mentioned that last week. You thought they were a sleeper team over on the East side, with, the lineup that they have and their pitching. You mentioned Hazelwood, 2-1 a year ago, 27 strikeouts and 22 innings. Zach Lee has had good numbers, 90-mile-an-hour fastball, slider, 9 strikeouts in 8 innings. Jimmy Ramsey, you know, 19 innings, 20 strikeouts last year, but he walked 12, 2-2 record. But, not a lot of guys see a 6'9" right-hander out on the mound. And that's an imposing, figure when you go out there as a hitter and you see a big guy like that. You're like, wait a minute, he's supposed to be on their basketball team. But you don't usually see that in baseball. And then, they have another Shelby, in the lineup. I think this is their 999th Shelby that they've had play at Kentucky over the years. Good legacy player, good tools, had a lot of success with his family over the years. And, Zeke Lewis, 6-year, 24-year-old guy at 370 last year with 7 RBI. And then you mentioned TJ Collette, who their offense is, I think centered around, 26 career homers, really good player, graduate senior, on the preseason all conference, preseason all American teams. And, he could do some damage, in an SEC lineup in the middle of the order. He can really do some damage. And I think that's where Kentucky will start this year is with TJ Collette.
Last team to cover, the Missouri Tigers, who frankly I think are a little bit underrated a lot of years. Honestly, I think Missouri's gotten jobbed by the selection committee a couple times, including 2019. The Tigers, I think what'll carry them again this year is pitching, which has usually been the case. Now, they're not top-heavy with guys like we've seen them over the years, like T.J. Sikkema was the last ace they had, the lefty who was so good. But they think that their pitching staff is about as deep as it's been since they've been in the league. The challenge with them usually is the lineup. I think that's the challenge again this year. But having said that, Brant Belk, preseason second-team All-American at collegiate baseball. They've got Mark Vierling at short, who's a senior there, been a 3-year starter at second, who's moved over. They've got a lot of two-way players. Seth Halverson is a guy to watch a little bit. He's a 230-pound center fielder who may also pitch on the weekends for them. Again, I'd love to see Missouri in another league because I think they'd be getting some NCAA tournaments they've not gotten since they joined the league. But again, this is a team that I think will be competitive, and it'll be interesting to see how the Tigers season goes.
It will be, and just where they play for one. When Tim Jamison was the head coach there and they first came into the league, I had opportunity to go to Auburn one weekend when they were playing non-conference before they joined the conference the next year, and had to sit down with him and visit with him and about them coming to the SEC. And he said, well, we're coming to the best baseball conference in the country. And he said, but we're disadvantaged. And he said, because of our location and the weather. And I said, do you consider yourself a northern school? And he goes, no, we are a northern school. I don't consider it at all. We are. And he said that plays a part with them, their weather. But, they've got a good lineup. Spencer Miles, 1-0 last year. Connor Ash, certainly been there for them. Spencer Jurgens, I think that's their projected weekend, starters. They've had some good bullpen work over the years, and their lineup, has got some names that we're familiar with. And Vierling has been there. I like Belk as a transfer from Pepperdine. Played at Pepperdine in 19 and played very well there. He's gotten a lot of preseason accolades. They got a junior college catcher and Mike Coletta, and then you mentioned Halverson, an outfielder who can pitch. Those are valuable guys. Two-way guys in college that can do multiple things. You can play first, DH, play corner outfield, pitch a little bit, because your scholarship money runs thin, in college baseball. Chad McDaniel's a veteran guy, can DH, can catch a little bit. I think he's coming off of some surgery and trying to get him back in the lineup. But, Missouri, in another league in the Big 12 or in another league somewhere would, be a team that could, could make some noise. They've been to the postseason since 2012. They've been close, but they hadn't quite gotten there. 11-5 last year, 34-22 the year before that, and fourth year under Coach Steve Beazer. But certainly a team that, you know, can make some noise in the SEC, as all of them can. I mean, it's you know, just how this league is. You know, your 14th team in this league is better than than most teams in other leagues, and it's, you know, Missouri, Kentucky, Alabama are all examples of that, of how deep this league is.
Bear, I guess my prevailing thought on the race this year, when you've got this many really good teams, right, it always is going to be hard to size up because, you know, you lose or win an inordinate amount of one-run games, and all of a sudden a team takes a jump or a drop in the standings that we didn't expect. But the rankings have a kind of consensus. You know, most teams, we talked about the top half of the league. Most teams in that are considered top 10, top 12 teams in the country. But it's just hard to find certainty this year. Again, we've talked about the lack of experience for some teams, the layoff from a year ago, the fact these kids didn't play summer ball. I think you can make the case this might be the most fun SEC year from start to finish just because, A, the number of good teams, and B, the number of unknowns. And I cannot wait for us to have baseball.
Well, I think that's true. There are a lot of unknowns. I think there's players and coaches that, you know, see this every day and see their team every day, and they have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow, March the 28th or May the 6th. I mean, I don't think they have a clue what's going to happen in their lineups, and because they haven't played in so long. I mean, it's, you know, pushing a year. I mean, the last SEC game that was played was March the 11th of last year, and tomorrow is February the 19th. So you're only looking at 20 days or so shy of a year, and so you don't know. I mean, these coaches don't know. They didn't have the summer ball that they're accustomed to having. You know, the kids didn't get to go and do some of the things that they do in the summer and play with other players and go to other parts of the country and play and just kind of see what, you know, what happens, you know, that. Another thing I think a lot of it has to do with is, you know, teams that win and lose and how much success you have is not only who you play in the league, but, you know, where you play them. And you know, when you're looking at, you know, just say Ole Miss, for instance, you know, they play Auburn at home. They go to Florida. They have Alabama on the road. They have Arkansas at home. They have Mississippi State on the road, LSU at home, South Carolina at home. They go to A&M, and they play Vandy at home, and they play Georgia on the road. So, you know, if you look, just taking them as an example, you know, predicted to win the West, but, you know, they're, you know, seems to be like a pretty good balance of, you know, the hard teams on the road. Of course, everybody's hard teams on the road, hard teams at home. And, you know, you also look at these schedules, you know, teams that try to avoid back-to-back weekends and maybe back-to-back weekends on the road. You know, that's extremely hard. You know, you want to try to avoid, you know, that if you can. You know, I mean, it's the way the schedule's set up, but it just always seems to me that teams that play back-to-back road weekends, you know, struggle in that second weekend probably more than they do in the first, and they hurt a little bit. You know, just looking at Georgia, April and May. Well, the first 2 weekends of May, you know, they're at Arkansas and they're at Florida. You know, that's probably not a good recipe for success there. You know, for them, just scanning some of the schedules. You know, as you look through, and you know, these teams that are, you know, contenders. You know, who does Florida play at home? Who does Arkansas play at home? Who do the Western Division teams play in the East, and who do they not play? You know, I think last year Alabama avoided Vanderbilt, you know, and Florida, and then this year they don't. So, you know, if you're going to get better, you know, in some of the leagues, in some of these matchups, it's not only who you play and where you play, but who you don't play. They don't play Florida, but they do go to Vanderbilt, and you know, talking Alabama does, and it's just where some of these matchups are, and who they are against, and who you don't play, and that's, you know, as we know, weather plays a part in it, and the league standings are based on winning percentage and best conference winning percentage, and some teams could play all 30 games and some teams could not. It just depends on the weather. So that where these games are played and who you're playing, that has a lot to do with it too. And that's just strictly luck and luck of the draw in the schedule.
Well, Barry, speaking of unpredictability, this just kind of sums up the whole last year and this weekend. I'm sitting doing this in the Nashville area, and we have 6 inches of snow and ice or so on the ground coming into the day. No snow forecast today, and so, of course, I look out the window, what's happening. It's snowing harder than it snowed all week, so that sets us up for the weekend. I don't know how much baseball we're going to see. I think you can count on seeing it in Florida, wherever else. I mean, God help us. Who knows at this point? But there's going to be baseball played at some point. We will have it covered at the 14. We will get a website launch probably Friday. You'll be a regular contributor there. But, Barry, I cannot wait for you and I to discuss baseball on the podcast this year and all the written content that's coming up at the Southeastern 14, or the 14 as we like to call it. Tell folks where they can follow you on social media as we end the show today.
Well, I'm on social media on Twitter at BKABAMA. You can follow me there. I tweet a lot about the SEC, obviously, but I also tweet a lot about college baseball in general. Not necessarily just the SEC and not necessarily just Division I. I like college baseball everywhere, and it's fun to watch. I've already seen, well, when I get through this weekend, I'll have 11 games under my belt, various teams and places throughout, here in the state. But, at BKABAMA, you can find me there on Twitter, and then we'll hopefully we'll have good content each night, on the recaps of these games and content during the week on what's going on in the SEC, the best baseball conference in the country.
Barry, thank you for your time. To our audience, thank you for listening. Stay safe. Easier said than done, maybe, and it's not easily said, apparently. But in any case, thank you for listening. We'll have more baseball and basketball coverage coming up next week at the 14.